Okay, I think that I'm hooked up. Okay, it don't work. Okay, got everything working. Sounds like the microphones are working. Looks like I can't hear them. Caster's on. YouTube's on. Okay, and there's hey. Hey, Marianne. I'm going to start here in just a moment. All right. So it may just be me here tonight because we've had all sorts of things happen today or over the last couple of days. But Roger Ramsey, and he had surgery today, and so he and Brandy have really been through it over the last few weeks. She's been in the hospital 3 different times, and now anyway, so they're not going to be here tonight, and we'll see how many more come in a little later, and they will just have to pick up where I am when they get here. So we are continuing in 2 Samuel all the way. We'll get to all the way to chapter 19 before we start again matching up and harmonizing between 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles. But tonight we're looking at 2 Samuel 14. And this is kind of a interlude passage that 12 through 19 make an entire section of 2 Samuel. Pretty much the life and the kingship of David. And we see, you would expect that the life of a king as a man after God's own heart, that seems to have had everything going for him before he was actually seated as king, and then to have everything fall apart. We look at this and wonder why. And the part of David being after God's own heart lies really in the fact that he's a repentant heart. Although he finds himself at the whole episode with Bathsheba as not being as honest as he should, and then once he is addressed with his shortcomings and his sin, he becomes extremely honest before God and before his people and before Nathan, and then after that we find that he keeps more in than he should. And the lesson that we can learn from that as individuals is that we really should work on allowing the things that we hold, that we somehow or another feel as though we have failed, or those things are going to maybe in some sort of way cause more damage if they're out. They're embarrassing. They may not, in David's case, fit with a king's life. And so he tended to keep some things in, and that continued to cause more problems. So our lesson in that, and one we'll look at a little more closely tonight, is, it's better to be openly honest, especially with those that are nearest to you, that probably perceive the truth of the situation anyway, like Joab does in this one thing that we'll look at tonight, like Nathan did, under the leadership of God, but probably also because he was near to David and sensed what was happening in his life. So the same thing is going on here, and it's not happening in a small, compact period of time. This is a protracted period of time, 2 and 3 years, that these things are happening. And so that lets us know that the longer that all this seemed to be left to fester, that the worse it became for David, for his family, for his kingship, for the nation. It just seems to kind of work at, the rot begins at this very tight center, but it very quickly works its way out beyond his life. Which reminds us also that who we are matters, because we do have an effect on the people that we are sharing life with. And rightfully so. We all have an impact on one another. And so we should always do our best to make those relationships sound and whole. Well, so we're going to get into that. And we're also going to get into, in this passage, Joab. He entices and recruits this wise woman of Tekoa to come and share a story that is much like the parable story that Nathan shares with David. It's shared to make a point about his life, and also we're reminded of some things in our life with family and those that are, for lack of a better word, a part of our clan, people that are meaningful to us, that are enmeshed in our life in some sort of way, that need proper attention. And the relationship that we hold with them needs proper attention. So let's go ahead and look at the passage. If you want to look in 2 Samuel, that would be chapter 14. And what we're going to do is look at the first 20 verses is one section, and then we see that there's another section. Well, actually, really, yeah, through 20. And then we'll look at the second section that kind of is a 21 through, what is that, 33? 21 through 33 actually kind of bridge us over into 15, 16, 17. Maybe even all the way to 19, but it's kind of a bridge passage that begins to tie some things together. And if you remember, the writer, 1st and 2nd Samuel, has this great ability to carry us from one section, even within a broader section. It carries us from one section to another with his literary craft, so that small things are introduced that we see later were representative of some very big things that were about to come apart. Or what appears to be a small character in a story, later we find out was really an important character in the next section of the story. So we're going to find that again when we get to verse 23 through, when we get through 21 through 33. Somebody was peeking in the door and I was trying to figure out what's up. Okay, so let us look. 14 of 2 Samuel, and I'll begin with verse 1. Now Joab, son of Zeruiah, realized that the king longed to see Absalom. Oh yeah, I don't have to talk to myself anymore.
Have you already started, sir?
Yeah, I just been doing a little introduction, so you haven't really missed much.
All right.
So, yeah.
Madison's with her.
How are you?
All right.
Good.
All right, where are we?
2 Samuel, chapter 14. Kind of finding ourselves right in the middle of, or right at the beginning of David and Absalom's great conflict that is about to be undertaken. But
Samuel 13?
14. 2 Samuel 14. So Madison's on her way again?
No, sir. She's,
Oh, she's not?
with her mother.
Okay.
Having dinner.
All right, cool.
So.
All right. I don't know either. Why she's not here. That's Sunday. Everything was fine. So I'll have to give her a call and find out. So first one says, now Joab, son of Zeruiah, realized that the king longed to see David. So here we have this. Joab is realizing, and it's not stated in any sort of way in the text, and we're not led to believe that David being king has shared his feelings with Joab. But you got to remember, Joab has been with David now a long time. And so he has kind of this sense, the sixth sense, like an intuition about his king. And so Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman. And that's what we know about her. She's from Tekoa, which is about 12 miles south of Jerusalem. So the chances of David having known her probably was slim. And we know that she's wise. We know that he was searching for a wise woman. Or maybe he knew of this woman already, but we never hear her name. We just know that she's from Tekoa, that she's wise. And that Joab sets up this entire episode. He tells her what he wants her to share with the king when she comes before him. And he's kind of already, in his mind and in his heart, kind of worked out what needs to happen here in order for David and Absalom to unite again. Okay? So he says to her to pretend to be in mourning and put on garments for mourning. Don't anoint yourself with oil. Instead, act like a woman who has been mourning for the dead for some time. Go to the king and speak to him in the following fashion. Then Joab told her what to say. So we don't know what he told her what to say exactly. Sometimes in these type of episodes that are presented to us, it'll be repeated. They'll say it, then they'll say it again. Sometimes they'll say it a third time to really drive home what's being offered. Here we have the story basically told one time. And so the significance to that would be that David hears it once and he makes a wise judgment. His wisdom is in line with her wisdom. And in the background is Joab, that's almost like the marionette guy, that's kind of making all this happen because he knows the heart of David. And although Absalom has killed Amnon, and this has happened 2 years ago or more, and Absalom went into a self-imposed exile, David never told him to leave Jerusalem. He just did it on his own. But during this 2 years, David's really done nothing to restore Absalom to the family. And Absalom has really done nothing to reach out. So the one that was wronged is holding his ground, and the one that feels justified by what he did. Remember, he killed Amnon because he raped his sister Tamar. He's not budging either. And so Joab is here trying to break the ice, so to speak. So the Tekoan woman went to the king. She bowed down with her face to the ground in deference to him and said, "Please help me, O king." The king replied to her, "What do you want?" She answered, "I am a widow. My husband is dead. Your servant," meaning her, "has 2 sons. When the 2 of them got into a fight in the field, there was no one present who could intervene. One of them struck the other and killed him." Now, let's go back to the whole thing that happened with Amnon and Absalom. And remember that the king and all his sons were invited. And the king decided, "No, I'm not going. I'm staying here." And in the passage, it makes it sound as all the other sons are staying too, because Absalom says, well, just let the oldest come, let Amnon come. Okay. And it gives the appearance that Amnon goes by himself, but then at the end of the passage, we hear that David mistakenly hears that all the sons were there and they were all killed, not just Amnon. So we're back to that picture, and this is part of the problem of 2 Samuel, how sometimes not everything lines up. All the facts don't always seem to line up with what actually is trying to be told that happened. Because from this story, it would be as though Joab said to the wise woman from Tekoa, saying, tell it like this: two sons by themselves in a field get in a fight, one kills the other. Which would sound like the way that the story initially began with Amnon and David, that he went by himself. And so there's no one there to intervene to try to keep this terrible thing that Absalom had put in place with his servants. There was no one to keep him from killing Amnon. So the same story is being told here. Verse 7. Now the entire family has risen up against your servant, meaning her, saying, turn over the one who struck down his brother, so that we can execute him and avenge the death of his brother whom he killed. In doing so, we will also destroy the heir. And here we come into the very important part of this whole thing. What are the two important aspects of being a Hebrew? Genealogy and geography. God promised a genealogy that your seed would go on forever. Okay, that you'd be a nation more numerous than the sands on the sea. That only happens if you have heir after heir after heir to carry on your line. The other is geography. I'm giving this land to you that you did not earn, that you didn't have to fight for. I'm going to fight your battles. I'm going to do everything. I'm giving it to you. The land flowing with milk and honey. So what's important to the story is that what she is talking about is the fulfillment of what God has already begun. And my son's family, remember, Amnon and Absalom are what? Half-brothers. So she's identifying in this story a kind of a split in the family, hinting at that they may not have shared complete blood there. So the story is more and more lining up with David's. Okay, verse 7. They want to extinguish my remaining coal, leaving me no one on the face of the earth to carry on the name of my husband. The remaining coal would have been her only son left. Okay. So she's offended by those that want to come and just extinguish her line. Now it doesn't fall perfectly with David's situation because he has two other sons. Okay. Then the king told the woman, go to your home. I will give instruction concerning your situation. And this answer doesn't seem to sit well with her. She goes on and said to the king, my lord the king, let any blame fall on me and on the house of my father, but let the king and his throne be innocent. So this is a way of saying, I need you to act more decisively, so that if anything does happen, it won't look like it's happened because you were indecisive or not acting in a way that brought the whole weight of your power behind it. Then the king said, bring to me whoever speaks to you, and he won't bother you again. So now David says that the ones that are trying to, in your story, the ones trying to wipe out your seed, trying to kill your other son, bring them to me, and that'll be the end of it. So his power is being wielded behind this, he's saying. Still doesn't know that this is a made-up story. All right? This kind of sounds like Abigail's husband. who was kind of foolish and believed everything that was brought to him. Plus the king of the Philistines, he was the same way. David was right in his own house, deceiving him, and he couldn't really figure it out. And here David is, here's the story, and he still hasn't figured it out. In fact, it doesn't even sound as though he's even in his mind or otherwise, at least the narrator's not letting us know that he may be looking at her story and thinking, this sounds a lot like my story. She replied, in that case, let the king invoke the name of the Lord your God, so that that avenger of blood may not add to the killing. Then they will not destroy my son. He replied, as surely as the Lord lives, not a single hair on your son's head will fall to the ground. Fast forward to Jesus, and one of his teachings about God is that when you trust him, not a single hair of your head will fall to the ground that he doesn't know about. So David is saying, I'm giving this the complete and undivided full attention that I can give it. And nothing is going to happen to your son. All right? Even though he deserves it, see, that's the whole other thing behind this. The son killed his brother. Even though he deserves the punishment that should befall on him, the king in his mercy, because the line would be wiped out, the king in his mercy is saying, I'm going to protect the one who has done this harm. Then the woman said, and now she gets to what's really going on. She's taking the mask off, so to speak. Then the woman said, please permit your servant to speak to my lord the king about another matter. So she's making the connection. He replied, tell me. The woman said, why have you devised something like this against God's people? So now she's relating to the way that David is responding to Absalom's absence and all that he did in conspiring this death of Amnon. She's making the connection that this certainly is not the way that God wants his people to be cared for. Okay, so she's talking about, why have you devised this against the people now? So she's bringing the whole thing. If the king's going to be the king, then everything that the king does has an effect on the people. And that's what she is helping him understand. And when we started this whole thing, 1 Samuel, what was God looking for in a king? Someone to be a savior of his people, to shepherd his people. And in this, we find that the lady is saying, what you are doing is not really illustrating, nor is it accomplishing what you have been chosen for to do. All right. When the king speaks in this fashion, he makes himself guilty, for the king has not brought back the one he has banished. So here we have, and this would have had to have been Joab instructing her what to say, although Jonathan left on his own and put himself in self-imposed exile. Somewhere over the last 2 years, David has said, he's gone, I'm banishing him. He's not going to be a part of the household anymore. Certainly we must die and are like water spilled out on the ground that cannot be gathered up again. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways for the banished to be restored. Now this is a huge thing that's going on here. Because she is understanding the mercies of God in ways that David has forgotten. So she says to him, you have put in place this banishment, and what it has done, it has not brought back the one he has banished, or not brought back the one that you have banished. All right? So in the mercies of God, that she is projecting and illustrating is, even in this situation, the one who has done the wrong doesn't deserve to suffer forever. That there's a place at which the one that has been wronged is able to offer some level of forgiveness that begins to restore the one who has been cut off, who is ultimately not an heir, who is ultimately not able to carry on any of the promises that God has placed, has given his people. Does that make sense? I have now come to speak with my lord the king about this matter, because the people have made me fearful. But your servant said, I will speak to the king. Perhaps the king will do what his female servant asks. Yes, the king may listen and deliver his female servant from the hand of the man who seeks to remove both me and my son from the inheritance God has given us. So your servant says, may the word of my lord the king be my security, for the Lord the king is like the angel of God when it comes to deciding between right and wrong. May the Lord your God be with you. So she finishes this whole story, made up story, okay, and brings it full circle back around it. This is this restoration that she is talking about, and really the deliverance of the son who has committed the crime into the mercies of the king, or the mercies of God, she extends it. That this is the whole story of God and his people. They didn't deserve what they got. In fact, they offended God. They were not the faithful wife to the faithful husband. Everything that should have happened to the people of the Hebrew people in the desert, and even after they came into the land, God would have had every reason to cut off them as being heirs to his promise. He could have destroyed that seed. But he didn't. He offered them mercy and restored them back and carried on, even in the midst of their rebellion. And so here is David. He's hearing this story. And he says, then the king replied to the woman, because he's finally figured it out. Don't hide any information from me when I question you. The woman said, let my lord the king speak. And the king said, did Joab put you up to all this? So somewhere over the last 2 years, David and Joab have had talks about Absalom. David has shared his heart in the situation. We don't know, but probably Joab has had conversations with Absalom, and he shared his heart about the situation. And Joab, very wisely, has put together this scenario that he knew David would listen to. Because one, he's the king, and he's supposed to make decisions like this. And two, it's a flattering thing to be able to use the wisdom of God to determine what is right. And so the lady comes and says, you should be doing the same thing about your own situation. And you're not. You're letting your pride, you're letting your anger, you're letting your position as a king who is never to back down and never offer to any vision of being what might be considered weak. All of that's going on in David's head, and the whole time it's killing him, because all of those things are keeping his son away. And so here, before we move on, we have in this a story about restoration, family restoration, where people that are in the family, there are certain people in a family that in their family system have the ability to allow for forgiveness or to not allow for that forgiveness. And the whole family is going to follow what they do. No one would have had Absalom back in Jerusalem for fear of the king. So the whole family, the whole nation in this case is involved in it. But in families the same thing happens. We have a system where one person is the alpha, so to speak, Can be a woman.
Patriarch.
Can be a child. It depends on where the family has placed them in the system. Yeah. But they're the ones that everyone is saying, oh, that's the family. That's the future of the family. That's the one that is going to decide. That's going to be the one that represents us through time. Is that one? Male, female, father, mother, oldest son, youngest daughter. We don't know which will it be. The family decides that. And in this case, David has been made king by God. Okay? So, in the background of all of this, God is the one that should be in control. But, as often happens, when we as human beings have control and power, we tend to use it the way that we want to use it. And so, this story reminds David, yeah, you have a son that you lost and was killed. Or you could say you have a son that has been banished by the family for what they did. Okay? You could bring into this whole conversation the Good Samaritan story that Jesus tells. The older son, the younger son. So you have someone that has been killed or been banished from the family. They're the black sheep of the family for something that they've done. And then you have the one that is basically making the decisions, being the heir apparent, being the figurehead, the face of the family. And they said, no way we're forgiving him for what they've done. I've got a kid right now in our sober living house. Comes from a fantastic family. Got a scholarship to play football. Was injured his second semester of school. Wound up taking pain pills for the injury. End of story. He's put his family through all sorts of things, okay? Family, this is the family. A lawyer, a registered nurse, a professor. I forget what the other one, something else, really professional. And he is now the black sheep because of what's happened to him. Okay? So, it didn't take long to figure out the family dynamic when we began to deal with him and his family, trying to figure out, because he's got trouble not just in Louisiana, but in another state. And it's all complicated, but so they don't mind sharing that we're just really angry at him for all that he has put us through. Okay. And there's only one that has said that, so we've figured out that's the one that is speaking for the family or is telling the family this is how we all feel. Okay. All right, so but now he's being trained for a new job. He's in a bad car wreck. He's having to go through rehab, extensive rehab, but he's not using any medication. He's being trained for a new job that he found on his, well, we helped him find it through house, but he's doing it all on his own. And so we're beginning to see that because of these things, the ice is beginning to break a little bit. Because there's no reason left to be angry. Yeah. Okay. So for Absalom in our story, he can't bring back the life of Amnon. And he wouldn't want to because of what Amnon did to his sister. Okay? So he's in this place of accepting what is offered. And now David is in a place where he is reminded that, behind all that you are is a God who is merciful to you. What did you do to deserve to be king? He was the youngest of the sons. He never really did anything to establish himself in the lives of the people or in the nation. God really went ahead of him and did all these wonderful things for him. He was well liked, and we never are told why. I mean, just over and over again, God is in the background working, and he's in this too. And in our own families, people mess up, and quite often it's extremely damaging. And one of the first things that we begin to think is, how are we going to protect the family? Because this is what goes on, the family. how is this going to affect the heirship, where we are in the future of human life, you see, human beings, society, culture, whatever you want to call it. And so we have to decide, how is that going to work out? Because if you carry enough, and it can be as mild as apathy, or it can be as strong as hatred. If you carry that for long enough, the family takes on a different character. Not just within itself and having to deal with the situation of the one that's been exiled, but the way in which the rest of the world begins to see the family. And the world's pretty observant. We all know when a family's on a train that's about to hit another train, you can almost feel it coming, you know. So we have to find a way through these things. And this doesn't provide an answer for every situation. It just says that it needs to happen. And it doesn't need to carry on for 2 or 3 years, as we will see in the rest of this passage and in 15, 16, and 17. Because Absalom agrees to all of this, but it hasn't solved anything. There's been too much time for it to fester. Yeah, we're gonna really get into the. We think that the David and Bathsheba thing is the darkest moment of his life. That's not it. We're getting to that in this next section. We won't get to it tonight, but we will. Like I said earlier, or maybe you weren't in here, talking to myself for the first 11 minutes.
I think this really, in my opinion, calls on boundaries in the act of forgiveness. Okay, so to be forgiven is one thing. But to be resolved from the responsibility or the consequences of your action is another thing. You see, now David can forgive him for what was done, but he can't. He's not going to let him be in his presence again. Of course, he may be able to go to his house, but he's not coming to the palace. All right, there's going to be some kind of a penalty that he's going to have to pay in his life. Okay, so you're forgiven, but that doesn't mean that you're absolved from. I mean, you're completely away from your responsibility for what you did, and you're not going to be allowed to go ahead and repeat that. You're not going to remain a danger.
So
now when we forgive somebody, isn't that kind of how we want to look at it too? I mean, so maybe put it in simple terms. So maybe I borrowed $100 and never gave it back. Okay, well, you can forgive me for that $100, but you'll never let me be in another position where I could take you for another $100. It's like, okay, hey, I know I love Kevin. His relationship to me and my family, and his family and my family are important to me. But that don't mean I'm ever going to let him get anywhere close to my money or any money that I'm responsible for again for the rest of my life.
So did you ever watch the movie or read the book Les Miserables?
Which one?
Les Miserables.
No.
With Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, Hugh Jackman does a musical.
Yeah, that's the movie.
The story is that this man that was he was harshly convicted for stealing bread. And was paroled from prison, and very soon after he is paroled, this priest takes him into the monastery, or not a monastery, really just a church, And while he is there, the night that he is there, spending the night there, he decides that he's going to steal the silver out of the cupboard. So he took all the silver plates and the silverware and leaves in the middle of the night. Well, the next day, a constable shows up, and he has this man, Jean Valjean, in his arrest, and brings him back to the church. And he says to the priest, who's, I can't remember his name right now. He says to the priest, this man we caught with all this stuff in his bag came from this church. We want to know what you want to do with him. And the priest looks at Jean Valjean and he says, you left without the candlesticks. I gave you all this to be on your way, but you left without the candlesticks. And he says to the servant, go in and get the candlesticks and give them to Jean Valjean. And so he looks at him in the eye and he says, he doesn't know what to do. Jean Valjean does not know what to do. He's never been treated with such extravagant grace and mercy. And the priest basically says to him that I just bought your life and I gave it to God. And so from that point on, Jean Valjean has a life-giving relationship with that priest that never ends. The whole movie is about, or the whole book is about how he takes his life and he takes a portion of what he's been given, not even all of it. He takes a portion of what the priest has offered to him, and he's made this really wealthy life for himself, in which he strives to give back to others until the rest of the story is the officer that paroled him, he broke parole, the officer that paroled him is constantly hunting him down so that he can bring him back to prison. And all Jean Valjean's doing is doing something great with his life. And so, what do we learn from that lesson? Forgiveness, if it is not restorative, even relational, then I think we've missed the mark. And that's David's problem here when we get to the rest of the story. David says, okay, bring Absalom back. He can move back into his house. But I'm not going to see him when he gets here. And so how long does that happen? Nearly 2 years more. They don't even see each other. And so what has really happened? All that's happened for Absalom is that he's changed houses. But nothing has really happened in the relationship. Nothing is really, the very thing that David wanted to happen, he's not allowed happening because he is not going to allow it to happen. He's the king. Right? He's a king inaugurated by God. He really can do whatever he wants to do, and he is. We started out in this passage, the first verse. He realized that the king longed to see Absalom, but David couldn't bring it to himself for that longing to accomplish anything in the relationship with his son. All it was a feeling. And Joab had responded to that feeling. And rightfully so, because he had a relationship of feeling with his king. He was empathetic and intuitive to who David was. Probably why he served him so well. But when we get to the rest of this, we'll look at it as we go. We may extend a little bit into chapter 15. Then the king said to Joab, verse 20. But my Lord has wisdom like that of an angel and knows everything that has happened in the land. So she's saying again to him, yeah, Joab gave me these instructions, but you are the one that is able to make the wise decision about this very scenario that I've laid out. Then the king said to Joab, all right, I will do this thing. Go and bring back the young man Absalom. Then Joab bowed down with his face toward the ground and thanked the king. Joab said, "Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, because the king has granted the request of your servant." And so here's Joab saying that everything I am to you, I know is of worth and value to you because you've honored what I've done for you. Now only a king, only someone that has authority and power can respond to such humility. And that's what's happening here. Joab is saying, "Oh my goodness, thank you, David, for understanding. What I was hoping to do was to help you come to a sense of peace about this thing with Absalom. What I hope to do for him is to bring him to a sense of peace about this whole thing, so that the family is actually functioning again." And we're in that same spot. We all, everybody I know suffers through family. It is a suffering that happens. So we got to decide, we can forgive, and if we never speak to the person, what good is that? I'm forgiving them, but I'm not going to allow myself to really, it's not going to cost me anything other than what's already cost me. So Jesus' forgiveness cost him everything. What did cost him and what was ever going to cost him, he paid the price. There was nothing left to wring out. All right, so verse 23. So Joab got up and went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, "Let him go over to his own house. He may not see my face." So Absalom is still being punished. He's still being exiled. So Absalom went over to his own house. He did not see the king's face. Seeing the king's face was said everything. Every time you read about the king, somebody approaching him, they are laying prostrate before his face. And he allows them to see his face. David's not even getting the chance to do that. Now in all Israel, everyone acknowledged that there was no man as handsome as Absalom. So here we go. This is the transition passage here. You recall when David was being introduced to the story? There was no one as handsome as David, right? He was young. He was vivacious. He was this ruddy. In fact, they call him this ruddy, handsome, dark. Young, dark, and handsome guy. Now David's older, and now it's Absalom. Absalom. From the soles of his feet to the top of his head, he was perfect in appearance. This is a flawless Adonis that we got going on here. When he would shave his head at the end of every year, he used to shave his head, for it grew too long, and he would shave it. So David's hair, sign of virility. If you can grow 5 pounds of hair in a year, that was just having hair was a sign of virility. Having long flowing locks was really a sign of virility. David would shave his head every year and collect up 3 pounds of hair. Okay, so it's just a way of saying tall, dark, handsome, and very viral. Had much virility. I can't even say the other word. Absalom had 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. So he had named his daughter after his sister. And she was a very attractive woman. So remember, whenever the writer introduces someone, we need to look out for later and see where she will come into play in the story. So Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without seeing the king's face. So 2 years between the time Tamar and Amnon, between the rape and Amnon's death, another 2 years in exile, basically, or a year and some odd, and then another 2 years without seeing his father. So it's been a long time. This has been 5 or 6 years that this thing's been going on. That's a long time to not have resolved something. Then Absalom sent a message to Joab asking him to send him to the king. So Joab's the doorkeeper. If Absalom wants to get to David, Joab's got to make it happen. But Joab was not willing to come to Absalom. So he sent a second message to him, but he still was not willing to come. So here we have in this little thing, we know where Joab's loyalty is. You know, there's tension. There's been tension now for 2 years in town. David's here, Absalom's here, and everybody knows that they're not having anything to do with each other. And here's Joab caught in the middle, kind of the gatekeeper. But his loyalty is to David. So Absalom said to his servants, "Look, Joab has a portion of field adjacent to mine, and he has some barley there. Go and set it on fire." So Absalom's servants set Joab's portion of the field on fire. That's one way to get somebody's attention, I guess. Burn down their crop. Then Joab got up and came to Absalom's house. He said to him, "Why did your servant set my portion of field on fire?" And Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent a message to you saying, 'Come here so that I can send you to the king with this message. Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me if I were still there. Let me now see the face of the king. If I am at fault, let him put me to death." So Absalom has had enough. I'm here in the same town with my father, and he's treating me like I'm dead. You might as well go ahead and kill me anyway. That's the line. So everything that the wise woman, with her and Joab's story, everything that they had hoped to accomplish really had not been accomplished. It had only been offered the appearance of being accomplished. Now we do this with God sometimes. We like to at times do things that appear as though we have found ourselves into His favor or found ourselves in His presence. When really what has to happen is that we have to acknowledge we don't find our way into God's presence. We are invited into His presence, and He's done so with the life of His Son Jesus. And that's the gatekeeper. Okay, so it's the same type of thing. It's just a picture. So Joab went to the king and informed him. The king summoned Absalom, and he came to the king. So finally, after 6 years of all this going on, 4 years not seeing his son at all, Absalom bowed down before the king with his face toward the ground, and the king kissed him. Okay. And we would think, if we read on from there, we would find a restoration occurring. All right? We would think, okay, 4 years, this terrible thing happened. Everybody, emotionally and otherwise, has paid the price for this. Now it's time to just put it to bed. Poor old Joab, he's the only one that's paid a price in this whole thing. He got his field burned. The rest of them have just been sitting on ill feelings, and now they finally have reached a point where there seems to have been peace. And we'll read on a little bit further and then probably stop. So it says sometime later, and we don't know how much time that is. Let's see. No idea. Sometime later, Absalom managed to acquire a chariot and horses, as well as 50 men to serve his royal guard. So Absalom is kind of putting together his own little court, let's say. Don't know how you hire 50 men, but it may have been just 50 men that decided, they were going to be loyal to Absalom. They may have been on the king's payroll, but they were loyal to Absalom. Now Absalom used to get up early and stand beside the road that led to the city gate. Whenever anyone came by who had a complaint to bring to the king for arbitration, Absalom would call out to him, "What city are you from?" The person would answer, "I, your servant, am from one of the tribes of Israel." Absalom would then say to him, "Look, your claims are legitimate and appropriate, but there is no representative of the king who will listen to you." Big fat lie. Absalom would then say, "If only they would make me judge in the land." Then everyone who had judicial complaints could come to me, and I would make sure he receives a just settlement. So he's saying, the king, remember, this is what the king does. He decides these things all day long. That's why the woman felt like she should go to him to begin with. He makes these decisions. Absalom saying, "No, there's no one in that court that's going to make a decision for y'all. I'm the guy that's going to do that. Just make me judge and it'll all be okay." So there's a campaign underfoot, right? If Absalom has the ear of the people, then whose ear does David have? When someone approached to bow down before him, Absalom would extend his hand and embrace him and kiss him. Absalom acted this way toward everyone in Israel who came to the king for justice. In this way, Absalom won the loyalty of the citizens of Israel. And so we're going to stop there, because here we get into another 4-year period, and we begin to see that what David left unattended has given Absalom a lot of time to figure out, how am I really going to deal with my father? So there's some resentment. If all he wanted was the king's presence, and the king had honored him with a kiss, and we hear no more from David in this until David finds himself really in trouble as a result of what Absalom has done. He's in peril, really. We kind of get the feeling that David's in the place where Saul was when David came on the scene. He's just kind of despondent and not paying attention. He's just at a place where nothing is comforting David. He has no peace. And this is a result, if we want to compare or contrast David's life before he had claimed the full throne over Israel, and the life since then, you see that his life was full of God on that side of the throne. And on this side, we find that it's just not. It's just not the attention. Where David would find peace before, where David would find direction and wisdom before. It just doesn't seem that it's happening in that way. And Absalom is certainly not showing any of the earlier life that David had. Absalom's life really is one that is kind of bent on vengeance. He wanted vengeance against his brother, and he killed him. He wants vengeance against his dad for holding him in exile, even though he's back now and obviously was accepted in some way into the family because he has chariots and horses and 50 men. But it's not enough for Absalom. He feels like he's been slighted. And sometimes that happens to the tall, dark, and handsome types. If they don't get everything they want, then they're going to still go ahead and try to get everything they want. They just by their presence have a sense of entitlement, and he had some power because he was the king's son. So we don't see anything resolved here. What we see is a son that is really out to say, okay, I got you to do what I wanted by bringing me into the palace and showing everyone that you had forgiven me. And now I'm going to take that forgiveness that you've offered me, and I'm going to turn it against you in order to unseat your place in the family, in the kingdom, whatever. Okay. So that's still part of the whole family dynamic.
Back to what I was saying before, that he forgave him, but he allowed him to cross him again.
Yeah.
He didn't protect himself. He didn't create a boundary there.
Yeah. We don't see in this story, and this is what's missing, because we'll see it at the very end. And it has to be that the writer wanted to show it at the end.
Right.
What we don't see throughout the whole thing is David's. Not only does he have the power and the wisdom, obviously, he's demonstrated that. He has the power and the wisdom. He also has the family connection to restore a relationship with Absalom. But everything that has happened that we've been able to see, and the narrator doesn't let us in on anything else, it's all formality. And Absalom receives it as that. So there could have been a place, instead of chapter 15 describing what Absalom has done to really cause David to flee Jerusalem, we might have been able to see in chapter 15 a story where David reaches out to Absalom and he does this wonderful thing of building a relationship again with his son that is healthy and productive and wise and true and all those things. But we don't see that because it didn't happen. And so we learn. You learn things by reverse engineering something. If you take it apart and put it back together, you can understand really better how it works. We are learning through a little bit of reverse engineering here what would have made this whole situation work once we tear it all the way down. We say, this is what was missing that could have changed the whole story. And from a New Testament perspective, what is missing here is the presence of a true Redeemer, one that is going to truly redeem the situation. And so David could have looked back to other instances, even in his own life, and said, "Boy, if I would have handled the story with Absalom, in the way that I handled things with Saul, I probably could have come out of this a lot better." But something happened to David. And that's where we constantly have to remind ourselves that positions of authority and power, that's not necessarily strength. Very often we give power to those that have no strength. It makes hard times. And we have to really, when we stay in this enough, when we stay in these type of lessons enough, we are able to begin to look into the future a little bit as to what's going on in our own situations and say, I know how to do this because of the situation that I can read right here. This isn't how you do this. And God has shown us a better way of doing it. So if you really want to experience forgiveness and for others to experience the reality of truly being forgiven, we really do have to pay in ways that go beyond just what has happened. David could have gone further. He could have done like the loving father in the prodigal son story. Here's one that has destroyed his name, destroyed his wealth, everything about it is just gone sideways. He's dishonored his brother, the family, just everything. And the father's response to this is, put the family ring, put the signet ring on his finger, put the best robe, butcher the fatted calf. We're going to have a big party because my son who was dead is now alive. And so David could have said to Absalom in this great moment of restoration, to restore him to the place that he once was as a real son. But that didn't happen. So we have those same challenges. We have those same challenges with people that offend us, that hurt us, that damage us. And so we have to do the old cliche, well, what would Jesus do? And he's going to forgive. The other way to look at it is the guy that comes to the king or to the ruler. Jesus tells this parable, and he brings this fellow before him, and the guy owes him so much money, there's no way in the world he'll ever repay it. He had 3 lifetimes to repay it. There's no way that he's going to repay the debt. So the one standing before him says, you know what? I'm going to forgive you the whole thing. At this point, it doesn't even matter. You're never going to be able to pay it. The only thing I can do to do anything toward you about this debt is to just lock you up in prison for the rest of your life and punish you for not being able to pay it. What good is that going to do me? So he says, you know, your debt's cleared, you don't have to worry about it. And then that guy goes and meets a fellow on the street that owes him 7 cents. And he says, you owe me 7 cents. And the guy says, man, I can't pay it, I don't have it. I'm throwing you in jail. Because if you don't have it, that's at least I can get something out of you. I'm going to take your life and put you in jail. And then, of course, we know the rest of the story. The ruler hears about what's happened. And he says, you mean to tell me that I forgave you of all that for a debt you can never repay, and here's this guy who owes you 7 cents and you throw him in prison. And I refuse to throw you in prison. He says, guess what? I'm going to throw you in prison. And you're going to stay there until you rot, because you can't pay your debt, and you can't even offer forgiveness to another person that owes you a smaller debt. Your life is worthless, is basically what the parable is saying. Although I've given you a chance for it to be of much worth, your lack of forgiveness has made it worthless. And so David, in a real sense, in this, the story plays out where had he been more forgiving, more loving, more redeeming, more restorative, then his whole life, to Absalom, then his life would have experienced some of that same thing. But he wasn't, and the result is that Absalom wreaks a kind of a vengeance upon his father, and his father's life becomes less for a period of time.
Well, it goes to who pays the cost. I remember I was confused for a long time about leaving your gift at the altar.
Yeah.
Okay. And what if the other person that you're having this problem with doesn't want to comply with resolving the problem?
Right.
Okay, then it's not that person's responsibility. It's not the offender's responsibility.
Yeah.
It's the offended, the person who is offended. It's their responsibility for the healing. You see, now that was hard for me in worldly thinking. That was hard for me to discern, to accept even.
That's right.
It took a while to get it.
Imagine if the offender, let's say there's somebody out there and it beats up your daughter or your wife. And the way the system works is, okay, the person that did that, whenever you choose to turn yourself in, come on, and then when you do, we're gonna really work with you to make sure you never want to do that kind of thing again. All right, how many offenders are going to do that? Okay, or better yet, to say, come on in, and we're only going to punish you for 5 years rather than 10. So who's going to show up at the jailhouse and say, okay, I did it. Give me my 5 years instead of the 10, and we'll call it even. Not going to happen. Okay. But the system, the ones that's been offended, should be able to go and say, Okay, you've got to pay the price, but we're going to do our best to restore you to a person that is good and right and true, a real human being. We're going to do something for you that you've never had before, and that's offer you a sense of worth, of restoration. So forgiveness, they're not fully forgiven of the crime, okay? But they've been offered a life of restoration. So which is worth more to the person? If you were to say, okay, you're forgiven, would that be worth as much as saying, but now I'm going to restore you? Which would you want? Somebody just says you're forgiven. That's good. I'm glad you're forgiven. I'm glad that you have it in your heart to forgive. But the person that's in need of a life is saying, is that all there is? So when Jesus meets the woman caught in adultery, he says, who here condemns you? And she says, no one. He says, then neither do I condemn you. And then the restorative part of that is go and sin no more. There's a place at which you've come now that says, everyone was here to stone you, and no one stoned you. They've let that go. Now what are you going to do with that? Are you just going to continue to be the person that you were being? You could have died today. Are you really going to continue to be what you were? The crowd has said to you, go and sin no more, because their sin is just as great as yours. See? So if we want to continue in our sin, then all we've done is acquaint ourselves with more sinners. And you never know what they're going to be. But if you go and say, okay, I'm not going to sin anymore. My life is now in a place where it can be restored. So it's not just something that's placed upon a person. David could have done everything right in the story. We could have read in chapter 15 where David put the ring on Absalom's finger and put him in the royal court and did everything right to restore David to who he was. And Absalom utterly rejected. Okay?
Yeah.
That could have happened. And when that happens, we don't have a whole lot to say about how that happens or why it happens. It happens. You know, if Absalom was unable to see through this imagined gesture and life that David was offering him, if he wasn't able to see that for what it is and just continue in his own bitterness toward his father, then could David really have done anything about that? Absolutely not, because so is a man's heart. So he is. As a man thinketh, so he is. And so, at that point, even if David had done all the right things, it still may have wound up where Absalom did the very thing, sitting out on the side of the, at the entrance of the city and gaining the favor of the people. And all that could have happened. The only thing that would be different is that we would know that David did all he could to make it right for and to make Absalom whole. That doesn't happen. So it's still up to the person that is holding whatever's in their heart. David forgives, and Absalom's got to forgive, right? Because David's forgiven him for what he's done to his son and probably all the chaos that it created in his family. But Absalom has to come to a place of forgiving David for the banishment and treating him like he was dead. If the two don't happen, then we still could have this. We still could have the same story. And that's the frustrating part, because, man, especially family, when they offend us and then there's really no effort to do anything, and they're just content in that. And you can do and say whatever you want and be as contrite and humble, and it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work.
Well, now David could have paid the cost. But what about everybody else that would have paid the cost because of his decision, his the other members of his household, his concubines, his wives, or whatever, his other children, that would have also paid that price.
Yeah,
See, now it gets deep. You have to consider. Okay, so I'm going to forgive this person, but if this person does not choose the right course, am I sacrificing everybody else who's already choosing the right course?
Yeah, so see,
are they going to suffer because of my decision?
in this situation,
So
the only ones it would have mattered to is the other sons. Everybody else's property. So it wouldn't have mattered. Whatever the king says goes. And that's the key here. David is the king. And so, although these others may be concerned, you'll notice that they never even come into the story. Because this is a thing about a king and how the king has been offended. What does the king do when he is offended? Does he allow that to continue and thus cause all the chaos that has occurred? Or does he do something about it and bring restoration to his family? So you can carry that in any situation. What does a father do when all of this chaos has been brought upon the family? Am I going to be the party that responds in such a way that allows it to continue? Or I'm going to respond in a way that says, you know what, I'm going to do all I can to bring about restoration. Now, if that restoration is not welcomed and is not embraced, then what can a person do? David's king, and we find out that whatever attempts that he made, Absalom has rejected and used it against David to run him out of his own kingdom. And there's a risk, right? I mean, after we get to the end of 15 and we're thinking, boy, it really wouldn't have been better for David not to have done anything. He should have rejected the wisdom of Joab. He should have rejected everything and let things be the way they were. Only we probably could imagine that it was going to get worse. Because when things are left unresolved, they always get worse. Always. And it takes both parties. And when both parties don't cooperate in that, then all that the king, all that the one that is wise can do is accept that I have done everything and the outcome belongs to the other person. We don't always get to determine the outcome. David certainly did not get to determine the outcome that we find in 15 and 16. Okay? We can only imagine that if he had done some things differently, it may have changed the outcome. And we know that he didn't do those things. So we're right to say that when David was handling this family issue, he didn't handle it very well. He handled it as a king rather than as a father. We can say that. He allowed his role as a king and the fact that he was not going to give in and have the appearance of having given in, that was more important to him than the restoration of the family and the son. So he was behaving as a king. His role in the family was misplaced. He should have been the father at that point instead of the king. And we all have that place at different times when we deal with family. Immediate family, extended family. Churches go through the same thing. Any organism that people have to relate in, we all find ourselves in these moments where what is truly valued by God especially is restoration. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Oh, nobody's watching. We got to go though. Adios.